I've lived in West Cape May for, I would say 70 out of my 76 years.
I've been here myself for over 80-some years.
I've lived there for about 50 years.
I was born in West Cape May in 1922. I am 87.
I've lived here all my life. I was coming here when I was 1 year old, Mom and Dad did. My family moved down here from Port Norris in 1926.
So we decided to come to Cape May, West Cape May, and we built a little cottage on 4th Avenue. So my father taught me how to use a nail and hammer and stuff, but I'm not a good cook.
I was technically almost born and raised here in Cape May. I was born in 1936. One day my mother was swimming off the beach in Grant Street, and the next day I was born. So that's as close as I get to being born in Cape May, but I was actually born in Philadelphia.
Oh.
I've been raised in Cape May and lived here every summer of my life from 1936 till the present day.
Back in those days, it seems like everybody had dogs, or one in the yard or one in the house. And don't forget the chickens in the yard. You know, we all know that the Grant Street in that area was the segregated beaches. But I understand in the end that was the best beach down on the beachfront.
I'm Janet Lindsay Eldridge Vance. We lived at 3rd Avenue and Broadway. My father was a native. His ancestors came to Cape May County in the late 1600s. Our life in West Cape May as young people was quite regimented by the gold beating. I'm sure that's part of your history, you know this. The gold beating was between 2nd and 3rd. And it was part of a company in Philadelphia, Hastings and Company. The people who managed the gold beating in West Cape May were the Reeves brothers. Reuben and Theodore was Uncle Dory and Uncle Reuben. And the whistle rang at 7 o'clock in the morning. It rang at 12. It rang at 5. And all the residents of West Cape May, because you could not help it here, were regimented, and their families were organized by when the whistle blew. The men did the gold beating, and it was really a very outstanding company. Hastings and Company was very outstanding, and the men did the gold beating, and the women cut the sheets. And I can remember the women bringing the little sheets went into the little notebooks, and it was quite an important. And you could do the sheets at home, and this is what the women did to earn money at home.
There was a bell hanging in the old firehouse, was on 4th Avenue, and there was a bell hung in a little tower in the back there with a rope hanging down from it. And at Halloween, about the time of Halloween, the word went around about who was going to ring the bell. I rang it. A couple of years, and the idea was to get up there, ring it enough to get attention, and get down and get hidden before the troops came out.
Well, I remember West Cape May had one policeman, and his name was Frank McNeil, and he lived on 6th Avenue.
Oh, good, he's going to mention.
And I always remember he had a hole in his ear, not for hearing purposes, but he had a hole through his ear, and I often used to look at that hole. He used to wear boots, high boots. Someone told me that he'd been shot, and that hole still remained in his ear. And I can still remember seeing Frank McNeil with the hole in his ear. He was a one-man gang. He did everything.
But I remember distinctly when they used to pick up the phone and the operator would say, yes, who do you want or whatever, and then, you know, no dial, you say, who who do you want? And they'll say, I want Swain's Market or whatever. And she says, okay, wait, they're talking to somebody, you know. So that was, that's the way that worked.
In the yard, there was a pump house. We used to line up, stand in line to get a drink of water at recess. It was the same tin cup.
The teachers were wonderful, I realize now, but I didn't think so at the time when the teacher, Miss Doherty, who taught the younger, the first couple of grades, kindergarten up, she would say to the children, I want you all to behave yourself, and if you don't, I'm going to crack your knuckles. And she meant it.
Mr. Moore and Miss Booker and Miss Stockley were the best teachers in the world. If you didn't know anything when they got done with you, you just didn't know. No.
We all went to West Cape May School. It was at the end of Fifth Avenue, and in those days it was a segregated situation. We were not segregated when we got to the high school because West Cape May could not afford a high school building. So we all went over to Cape May High School. And believe it or not, we walked. We were not transported. Cape May Point and Lower Township, which we called Cold Spring, they were transported, but we were not, and we did not stay for lunch. 9 o'clock, school started, the high school started. We came home for lunch. We went back after lunch at 1:30, came back at 4 o'clock, and we walked. And I cannot remember really, except in very inclement weather, when my father ever drove us to school. That's why we were all thin. There were no fat children in those days.
No obese children.
No obese children, because we walked back and forth to school. We went over what we called the Y. Now the Y was down Pearl Street. You're familiar, of course, with Pearl Street. And the trains came in that area. That was sort of the shortcut to the high school.
We learned so much. Our teachers were dedicated. They were with kids after school and prepared them for high school. We were taught to play music, singing, dancing. We did it all.
Miss Jenny Hughes, maybe you folks knew her. She was the nicest teacher, and even when we were not in her class anymore, cold, snowy days, she'd meet us at the door and rub her hands to get them warm. We thought she was the best teacher ever.
We had the West Cape May String Band, which I belonged to. One time we went over to Atlantic City and they just had radio. They didn't have TV then. So we had to go over there to the radio station and play. And everybody would listen to us from here. You know, that was a big event.
Mr. Moore used to teach string instruments, mandolin, violin, ukulele, you name it, and he taught it, banjo. And he used to have a string group, and they used to go to Atlantic City, and I can remember this as a kid, where they used to go, and they used to go to WFPG. I had a guy by the name of Jack Petrie, and they used to play their instruments over there, and that was great. He taught that, and one of the things that he did, he taught so-called black history back there in those days, where even though they sort of take pride in doing black history for a month, now we used to do it all the time.
Like I said before, people have asked me, what's it like when you had two schools? You had the black school and your white school. Well, as far as I know, we didn't have a white school and a black school. One thing, some of our friends went to that school, some of our friends went to this school. But as far as color is concerned, we didn't even know what segregation was.
And we were
segregated up until I think I was either in 3rd grade or 4th grade. It was in the late 40s when they joined the two schools together. We used to use the annex. It was called the annex, the school where it was originally the black school. But we used to use that annex after the integration of the schools for recess. We used to do square dancing there. Mr. Moore used to be there because we used to do everything together anyway before that. The integration was not a problem.
We walked to school together.
We walked to school together, we played together. There was really no difference, and we really
think of anything different.
We just, you know.
We don't even remember when they desegregated because we were just always together.
Yeah.
We just played on the street. They went to school, we went to school, we came
We
out
were
together
always
again.
happy together. Everybody was happy.
Absolutely. We didn't think anything of it.
We had music programs together. Yeah. We made fudge together. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Our ball field and their ball field were combined when we played baseball. So
And we
played
had
ball.
May Day together. With the races, you know, the three-legged,
Oh,
all
yeah.
the races.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
One of my closest friends that lives here is Ralph, freeholder Ralph Bakley, of whom I think you talked to not too long ago. I lived on Leeming Avenue, and Ralph grew up on York Avenue, a couple streets over, and we went all through Westgate May. He went to the Westgate May School, and I went to the Annex. We get a big joke out of it now. We walk down the street, hand in hand, bicycle, and called each other names, fought and everything. And then we got to the schools and we separated like that, which we didn't pay any attention to it because that's the way it was. That's the way it was when we got there, and that's the way it was when we left there.
When Archie Swain had his store, it's on the left-hand side, and I had a pony, and that I loved, and I'm up home, up in the country now. Okay, so I would go for a ride, and she used to belong to Archie. Archie sold her to my dad for me. Okay, so we'd go ride, and I'd head maybe for the beach or whatever, you know. And all of a sudden, oh Maud, she'd just go. She knew where that store was. She'd go right in there, and Archie had a barrel of apples in the back, and she'd go there and take an apple out, walk right on out, and then we'd go for a ride.
But when I was a kid back in the late 30s, every corner from here to Sunset Boulevard, I might be stretching the point a little bit, had a store on it. I can remember on the corner of Lehman Avenue and Broadway, the house still sits there, I don't know who owns it now. Mrs. Globet had a candy store, and on the corner of 6th Avenue and Broadway, Mrs. Oliver had a candy store.
We had a lot of stores. We had the A&P store, we had the Acme store, we had the Clarence Smith butcher shop and grocery store, we had Swain's butcher shop, we had Ostrowski's butcher shop. So we had a lot of stores, and I don't understand where all the business come from, but they all seem to survive.
Well, they had the store in the corner of Jackson and Washington.
Well,
That corner store that Harry Reeves took over.
Oh, okay, that was Ostrowski's.
That was Ostrowski's.
And then he moved up to Westgate May. He was right at the corner of Broadway and York Avenue.
Hillary Kelly's wife used to run a ice cream store on the corner of Sunset Boulevard and no, I guess that's West Perry Street. And you could buy a pint of Hershey's ice cream for 17 cents.
My grandfather owned the store, and then when he became of the age that he really couldn't manage it very well, my father bought the store from him. And he kept the store, it was Smith's Grocery, and he kept the store until he had a very bad heart attack and then had to sell it. But it's still standing. West Side Market used to be Smith's Grocery. And he had, Doris mentioned big barrels. My father had New Orleans molasses in the back of the store in big barrels. And the customers would come in with a jar and, you know, a little spigot, and you'd get a pint of New Orleans molasses.
My mother would make molasses cakes and serve them for breakfast for we children who did not have cereal or eggs or any of this.
It was a very healthy thing.
But we survived.
Well, the chapel, the building's still here, but the Sunday school isn't here anymore. It's a restaurant or something.
We made a float and took it to Sea Isle, where we won first place. And everybody in the group was extremely happy about that, so we wanted to bring it home and show it off. The first year was fine, and Cape May had their parade, and we were in the parade. The second year, we won again in Sea Isle, and we wanted to bring the parade home. And the director of the parade from Cape May wasn't very enthusiastic. I know I made it a point to go through all the stores at that time and say, you know you're having a Christmas parade, you know you're having a Christmas parade. Most of them didn't know anything about it. But the day of the parade, it rained in torrents. It was just sheets of rain. And so I called the gentleman in Cape May and asked him what he was going to do, and he didn't know. And I said, okay, well, I'll call the ones that I called to come to the parade and tell them we don't know when just yet. Well, don't you know, either the next day or the day after that, I picked up the paper, and he said he canceled the whole thing. And I say, don't make Mrs. Daly mad. So I went to the mayor, Ed Smith, and said, you know, we got to bring Santa to town. And he says, we sure do. I said, I don't know what I can do, but I said, I ought to be able to get a few things together. We got one float. We could probably get the fire company, and we'll start out. We'll have a parade. We'll see if we can earn any money and go from there. So we had the West Cape May Fire Company. I think we had the not Town Bank, the Courthouse Fire Company, and we had Lower Cape May Regional High School Band, and our float, and some flag carriers, and Santa came to town on a fire truck.
The first thing I did when I came here as pastor in Cape May in '61 was to organize a choir. I had sung with a choir that Wings Over Jordan, y'all probably heard of, because everybody heard, because every Sunday morning, I think around 10 o'clock, they were worldwide. You know, it was the only group during World War II, I think, that the government sent abroad to entertain the troops. Yeah, it was the only one. And I was blessed when they got back. They stayed over there a year. And when they came back to America, and I was able to join them.
Yeah.
Wasn't that nice?
Yeah,
it was. And so that was a tremendous experience. You know, we traveled all over the country, you know, and we sang from Carnegie Hall to Hollywood Bowl, you know.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and everywhere. So it was a tremendous experience. And I think that has kept me going as long as yes, indeed. I came here in '61, and the first thing I did was organize the choir, you know. And of course, you know, if you were around then, you know, we packed Convention Hall.
Yes, I
we did that for years and years. Right. Yes, indeed. We always had about 1,000 people, you know. It was nice because this church had not done a lot of spirituals, and they didn't know. This came out of Wanamaker's home. The Wanamakers owned this. It was at Cape May Point, and the old Wanamakers, they owned the house out there. I got that mirror 1830. That's when that was. For years, I used to lecture during Black History Month to all schools in Lower Township, because I worked in Lower Township for a long time, and for 25 years in fact. And I would go every February and take these African pieces, you know, and the kids just explain to them how they were made, you know, and they would be thrilled.
My name is Margaret Peck, and I'm 94 years old. Has to be 91 years old, 91 years.
How about that?
I moved to West Cape May when my dad had to quit white-titanium glass blowing in Millville for his health. Doctor ordered him to come to the shore. Dad worked a garden. We had just about every kind of vegetables under the sun, and a big strawberry patch. Besides, on the property, there were gooseberries and raspberries and blackberries and quince. Mother put everything up. Her pantry was really pretty. Jars and jars of things. Mother opened a jar of cherries, and they were spoiled. So without thinking, she just threw them over the fence to the chickens. A little while, she called me to the kitchen window to look out at the chicken. They were all falling all over each other. They were drunk. Cousin Sam Taylor had a dairy farm. His dairy farm and the Phillipses was the only two in West Cape May. And he would give us milk. Of course, those days it was in bottles, quart milk, and the cold days, really cold days, the milk would freeze before we get it from the step, and it would raise up like that. But it was still good, and there would be cream on those bottles, about that much. Mother'd take some off, and we'd have homemade cottage cheese and homemade butter. In that house, in the kitchen, there was a small door that opened that we could talk to the people next door. They had a parrot. And of course, us kids liked that parrot. The only thing he ever said was, "Polly wants a cracker." We would pick violets. You don't see them along this roadside anymore, but they were so pretty. And there were also something called Stars of Bethlehem or something.
I have those in my yard.
They were wildflowers, and they were along the road too, so of course we picked them.
I'm Isaac Harris. I was born in West Cape May in 1922. I am 87. Well, this is the third aircraft that I built. It's like the first one. I'll tell you what happened. My second airplane I built was a two-seater because my grandchildren wanted to take a ride in an airplane. So what happened? None of them wanted to go up. So I said, after I sold that, I said, oh, I'm going back to a single seat. That's the end of it.
My name is Shirley Rebecca Vance Wilson, and I lived in West Cape May during my high school years. My family, the Vance family, goes back until the really the 1700s through ancestors. However, the Vance family goes back to about 1835, I believe. And that was my great-great-grandfather, Michael Vance, who resided in Lower Township. He was married to Charity Cox, and they had 7 children. Among the 7 children was John M. Vance, my grandfather, and he had 2 children, Joseph Sterling Vance and John Earl Vance, my father and my uncle. I lived on 5th Avenue, 230 5th Avenue. My neighbors were Miss Octavine Howard and her husband, Octier Howard. I remember Miss Octavine very well because she was very instrumental in getting me into my quote-unquote first social group. Mm-hmm. That group was called Youth Felicitaires. Oh. And it was a small group of young girls, mm-hmm. and she took us to various functions. She was very proper, taught us, not taught us because of course my mother was mm-hmm. very proper, mm-hmm. but reminded us about etiquette and manners and being polite and how to speak. She was very instrumental in teaching us speaking out in public.
My name is Wanda Wise Evelyn, but I really am a Cape May girl. My dad was born in West Cape May, but he ended up living in Cape May with my mother. It started out with Becky Vance, and it started about 15 years ago through one of my aunts that lived out here in West Cape May, Octavine Howard, Octavine Major Howard. And what she had Becky do was to document certain families here in Cape May, and Becky made an outline of certain families and the lineage where we all came. So last year, I had started years ago compiling information on my family, where they came from, and we are both, Becky and myself, were also part of the Center for Community Arts, the History Committee. We've been on the board. Becky served as the director. And we decided to do a family tree exhibit. And so we started bringing all of our information together. Only to find out that mine started out with the Major family, hers started out with the Vance family, some other people started out with, another family. And we all found out that we all came from the same family, which was the Turners. But it went somewhere else. We only were tracking from like the 1800s, only to find out after we started checking into the census and Ancestry.com and different, organizations like that. We found out that these Turners, who had been here since the 1700s, were some of the first property owners down here in Lower Cape. One of the children he had was Hester, who married a Major. And I know the Majors migrated here from like Atlantic County. They weren't here, they didn't get here until around the 1820s. And Hester and James Major had 9 children, Theodore being one of them, which was my grandfather's father. And he married in Edmonds. That's how Aunt Octavine Howard, Octavine Major Howard, had traced back to her grandparents because she was my grandfather's sister. She ended up here in West Cape May. And her husband, Octier Howard, their home on Pacific and 5th Avenue, right next to Becky Vance. They were neighbors. It served as a place where they would meet for graduation because the schools were separated. There was a black middle school and a white middle school. And she has a picture, we actually have a picture of it in the West Cape May Historical Society of the class of 1939 sitting around their fish pond in their yard. My mother is, Aunt Adi was my mother's aunt, my grandfather's sister. Well, she married a West Cape May boy, Wise. My mother was from Cape May and my father was from West Cape May. My mother always said that her husband, my dad, was from the country. Like that. She would say he's from the country. Yes. So you'd come across the creek and you were in West Cape May, a block away. But it was the country. Because there was a lot of farms here. Jack Vassar had pig farms. He used to come around. I can remember distinctly, and I'm sure Becky remembers as well. Everyone had a slop can in their backyards where you would scrape your garbage for Jack Vassar's pigs. And as a result of that, we grew up, I always tell people, I grew up eating pork and seafood, you know, because that was free. You had the fishermen that would bring you the free fish, and Jack would reward people for saving the slop for him, for his pigs, and we always ate pork and fish growing up. And also a lot of people had, like, raised farm, you know, they had their beans and corn, and it was country like that. You came out here to get your bushels of peaches and all that kind of stuff. I can remember as a kid just going and getting bushels of tomatoes, peaches, everything, right here in the country. And if you really went to the country, you went to Lower Township. That took you half an hour to get out there. That was real country.
My mother owned the house over on Sunset, where the Cape May Wicker is. That's where her and her husband lived. And then when something happened, they gonna pull it down, or they moved over here. And this was in 1959. And she lived here until my sister bought this house, and her and her husband.
1984.
In 1984. My stepfather lived here, I guess, most of his life. But I came to live with him and my mother and all of them in 1950 on Sunset Boulevard before they pulled our old house down. And my original home was from Richmond, Virginia, and I'd go back and forth from Richmond up here. And in 1955 I got married in this house over on Sunset Boulevard and raised 6 kids and been here ever since. Been working at the shower farm since I was 9. My sister was 7, I was 9. I went in the dining room and started waiting when I was 12. And we had 3 cooks, old cooks, and they all died out, and the owner said, would my mother and I come out and cook? Well, at that time, my mother was head waitress, which now you call them hostesses, and I was a waitress. And we used to come in the kitchen and watch the cooks, what they do, and we knew just what to do. So we came out and started cooking. And I guess I was 39, I don't know how old my mother was. And they said they just come out and cook until we get some cooks. Well, I was 39, started cooking, and I'm 83, and I'm still cooking. They haven't got cooks yet. My sister came down and joined us to help cook. And I'm still cooking. Hope to go back this year, maybe my last year. I want to retire after this year. I'm getting too old. I'm 83. It's time to give it up.
As my sister, we came up, you know, as kids. I was 7, she was 9, as she told you. And she happened to find a husband, a fisherman. I couldn't find a husband, couldn't find a job, so I went to Princeton. Because there was no jobs here in the winter. Of course, I worked at the shower farm. I was a waitress and a cook at the shower farm, and I loved both of them. But at the end of the season, there was no jobs here and no men, so I went to Princeton, got a job, and found a man. And I came back to Princeton. Came back to Cape May, yeah. And that was in 1984. And I've been here ever since. But I grew up, because every summer I was always here, but in the fall I always go back home. And also in the summer, when I met my husband, we all came down to Cape May. In the summer, I always go back in the fall. And I love Cape May, and I love the shower farm. Like my sister said,
The first owners were great people, and the second owners were great people, and now Bob and his wife, they're great people. And she said this is her last year, so it'll probably be my last one too. You know.
And I fell in love with the family. They were so nice, you know. And she was a widower. She raised these kids. Beautiful family, beautiful, because when each fella came home, he was more handsome, you know, the uniform and all. Yeah. And in fact, I got engaged to one of them.
Oh.
And then when I was going back and forth in Chester, I got engaged. So I was like engaged to two people at the same time. I had a problem there because well, the thing of it is they both were in and out. You know, one was traveling with the Army, one was a sergeant, and the other was. And in the meantime, my supposedly husband coming up, he went to officers training school in Connecticut. And I did tell him, you know, I said, well, I was staying at my aunt, you know, when I kept coming down on the weekends and staying with my aunt. And it was very painful for me to, I didn't know how I was going to do this. I knew I was in trouble. So my husband was so sad when you know, my heart bled for him. Yeah. I really felt terrible. I mean, words cannot express how badly I felt when I had to tell him that, you know, I was interested in somebody. Yeah, well, I said, and this guy on the other end is telling me, well, now you come back without that ring, because I had an engagement ring on by this time from my husband. I went back with the ring on, and I said, well, you know, I was going to get rid of the other guy. I had the whole weekend to think about it, you know. But my husband was very good, a nice person, home. He was raised by aunt, a maiden aunt, you know. The rest of the family was raised by aunt, so he was a very good person, very trustworthy. And so I went back to New York, and I had to tell the other guy had a fit. He really had a fit. I mean, he did a little performance that I didn't like, and he said that, and when he got back, I wrote, I guess he thought I was still going to be engaged to him, but he said later on when I met him, yes, she sent me a Dear John letter, which I did.
But now the steps are from Rikers Island. There were old benches with cigarette burns, if you know about Rikers Island. It was, you know, like a prison. But they we got the benches and made steps. Now going up the steps, you have to, Bill said this is old for old folks. We use the oars on one side, the boat oars, and then the handles for old folks, he said.
Well, I've got a historical connection to West Cape May in that my great-grandfather, Jedediah Rutherford, owned a lot of land in Cape May going back to the 1800s. My recent connection to West Cape May, I moved back to New Jersey in 1997 to work with my brother at the Rio station. Our family has been here ever since basically the Mayflower. We're Mayflower descendants, we're Hands, we're Wares, and we're Rutherfords. My father lived on Grant Street, grew up on Grant Street with his father, who was Jesse Rutherford, who used to run the Cape May Carriage Company. And he had a number of horses, and in fact, the horse farm out off of Bayshore was at one time his, and he ran, I don't know how many horses and carriages around Cape May in the late, I guess, early 1900s. And my father, he was not a pilot. His brother was the pilot. And my father became a pilot in the late 40s, early 50s, after World War II. And they stayed and remained in Cape May. Going back to, again, 1807, and the fact that the pilots have been in the family, my father was an apprentice to from Andy Knobb. That was my father's apprentice. I don't know for sure, but I believe that my father's uncle was the pilot that my father apprenticed for, although I don't remember his name, which is embarrassing. But they've been pilots forever, and the Pilot Boat Philadelphia, they've run out of Lewis, Delaware, and up to Philadelphia. My father was president of the Pilots Association at one point. He was a master mariner. Master mariner is a person who has an all-tonnage, all-oceans license, basically able to carry aboard any vessel of any size on any ocean. And there's a very few number of those guys around. My uncle Ed Wooters, who was not a real uncle, but one of my father's best friends, was another master mariner. And he gave me one of his treasured little items, which was his little black book that he carried with him all over the world. It's pretty interesting, actually, because not only did it have all the signaling commands and just about every language you could imagine for bridge, communication, but it also had the sweater sizes and other sizes of things like hosiery and so forth for all his girlfriends all over the world. So it was a pretty interesting little black book, It was pretty interesting. There are a number of pilots here in town. George Douglas was a pilot. He's a local resident. There have been a lot of pilots in Cape May. Andy Knapp, as I mentioned, Walt Stringer. I believe that right across the street, in the old house that's right across the street, used to be owned by one of the pilots, and I just can't remember. But there are a lot of pilots and a lot of pilot heritage in West Cape May and Cape May. And on the island here, because this is where the pilot boats used to launch from to get out to the Delaware River.
It was a true neighborhood. Everybody watched out for everyone, and you belonged to the neighborhood. I mean, everybody basically took care of you and reminded you of how you should behave should you misbehave.
People back in those days, they looked out for each other, shared. Everybody was, just there for one another.
We're drawn to West Cape May because of the small town nature. We were really, that's what we fell in love with. We went to the school. We felt that the school was the place for our kids, and we felt that the small town atmosphere here was, you couldn't beat it. That's why we're here.
But the borough was very, very special. It was a very special place. And when I come in here and I look at the lineup of all the mayors, their pictures up there, it's funny, I can remember each and every one of them. And I'm only 40 years old.